Today we're going to talk about some properties that we've been going over. The first couple of properties are commutative property. We have the commutative property for both addition, and we have the commutative property for multiplication. So the commutative property for addition, commute. That means we're going to change the order. So if I go A plus B, if I change the order, that means I'm going to have B plus A. I notice that the operation is addition and then I'm changing the order, so I'm using the commutative property. If we look at a real-world example, that would be like 5 plus 4 equals 4 plus 5. They both equal 9. All I did was to change the order that I added them in. So commutative for multiplication is going to commute the order, and we're going to deal with multiplication. So that would be like A times B is equal to, flip the order, B times A. If I'm going to look at a real-world situation, that could be like 5 times 4 is equal to 4 times 5. 5 times 4, 20. 4 times 5, 20. I didn't change anything except the order. The next property we're going to look at is the associative property. We have two properties for associative. We have associative for addition, and we have associative property for the multiplication. So, associative, that's who we associate with, our group of friends. So that deals with grouping, which is going to deal with parentheses and changing our groups. So if we were to look at it with letters, that would be like A plus B plus C, where I'm going to group A and B. They're in a pair, and C is by himself. Then I'm going to leave the order the same that I write the letters, A plus B plus C, but I'm going to change the group. Instead of A plus B being in a group, now I'm going to put B plus C in the group. And A is by himself. I change the people that are in the parentheses. Notice the operation is still addition for associative for addition. If I'm looking at associative for multiplication, I'm going to change the order of the grouping. So I'm going to have A times B in parentheses times C, C is by himself. Then I'm going to leave the order of the letters the same, but I'm going to group the B and C this time. If I was looking at real numbers, this would be 3 times 4 times 5 equals 3 times 4 times 5. Over here for the addition side, that could be like 3 plus 4 plus 5 equals 3 plus 4 plus 5. Again, changing the grouping. The next property that we're going to look at is the distributive property. The distributive property is a property that you actually use more often than the others. The distributive property says that if I have A parentheses B plus C, I'm going to give everybody in the group an A and multiply them. So I draw my arrows. So that's going to give me A times B plus A times C. If I look at it using numbers, that could be like 5 parentheses x plus 3, and I draw my arrows, so that would be like 5 times x is 5x plus 5 times 3 is 15. Let's take a look at another property. Let's look at the identity properties. We have one for addition, and we have one for multiplication. So the identity property says that I am not going to change the identity of the number. So what number can I add to any number and still keep that same number? That would be 0. So the identity property says, for instance, A plus 0 still equals A. I did not change the identity. A stayed A. So if I'm looking at it in real number form, I'm looking at 6 plus 0 is equal to 6. I didn't change the identity of 6. Identity for multiplication says what number times any number is going to leave that number the same. And that happens to be 1. So if I do 1 times A, that's still A, because 1 times any number is that number. So if I do 5 times 1, that still gives me 5. I didn't change the identity. The last properties that we're going to look at are the inverse properties. Inverse is kind of a word that means opposite in math. Again, we have inverse for addition, and we have inverse for multiplication. So let's take a look here at addition. I'm going to add the opposite. So if I look, if I have 5, the opposite of 5 is negative 5. So that's going to be my example. 5 plus negative 5. And what are the opposites when I add them together give me? 0. So when I write this down as a property with letters, that's going to be A plus negative A, the opposite of A, equals 0. The inverses, when added together, the opposites when added together are going to give me 0 always. Inverse for multiplication. This is a little bit trickier, but still, it's okay. If I have 5 times 1/5, I flip the 5, that becomes 1. Now let's look at it in the multiplication process. I put whole numbers over 1, and I'm cross-reduce. So 1 divided by 1 is still 1, and 5 divided by 5, if I cross-cancel, those are 1s. So then 1 times 1 is 1, over 1 times 1 is 1. So inverse for multiplication always equals 1. If we're looking at it in letter form, that's going to be A times 1 over A equals 1. Hopefully this helps with our properties.